She thought it was just another cleanup op until the radio call went sideways and her name got attached to a case that didn't belong to her. When dispatch paused the log and the lieutenant leaned in with that quiet threat, she realized this wasn't a mistake. It was a setup. Case 21 to Tau 409, the static that started it. All. The rain was relentless that night, bouncing off the hood of my unmarked like hail on sheet metal. I sat in silence outside the warehouse, watching shadows shuffle behind shattered windows. The only sound came from the radio clipped to my shoulder, crackling, disjointed voices. And then silence. Something felt off. The op wasn't mine. I wasn't even supposed to be here. But when dispatch had radioed earlier, something in their tone made me pause. Then the call came. Detective Alvarez, units in need of assistance at your 20. Possible federal asset inside. Do not engage. Federal? I wasn't briefed on any joint operation. I wasn't briefed on anything. As I stepped out of the car, I scanned the perimeter. A pair of uniforms stood under a dripping awning, nervously glancing at the door. I nodded at them, pushed open the door, and walked into chaos. Papers were strewn across the floor, and the air reeked of mold, printer toner, and adrenaline. In the center of the room, 2 plainclothes agents, guns drawn, yelling at a man cuffed and kneeling. "Detective Alvarez, right?" one of the agents asked without looking at me. "This your op?" I froze. "Excuse me?" "You're the lead," he barked. "That's what we were told." That was the first time I heard it. That lie. The words were sharp, unmistakable. And like a stain on a clean report, they wouldn't come out easy. Back at the precinct, I walked into my office with soaked shoes and a gut full of static. I dropped the folder onto my desk. Case 21409, someone had scrawled across the cover in red marker. But I never opened it. I knew better. When you touch something too hot, you get burned. I booted up my terminal and pulled the radio logs from earlier in the night. Click, save. Destination folder, District Case 21409. Just in case. 2 hours later, I was summoned to the lieutenant's office. She barely looked up when I entered. "Sit down." She slid a statement across the desk. Pre-filled, pre-signed by everyone but me. "You'll sign this was your operation," she said, "or lose your badge." I laughed once, dry and short. "You want me to lie for internal?" "No," she said, standing. "I want you to lie for survival. You don't want to be the detective who broke protocol on a federal case. Trust me, they'll eat you alive." I stood too. "Then let them try." She narrowed her eyes. "Think this is noble? You're just noise in the system, static. We'll mute you." I left her office with the statement still on her desk and a silent scream building in my throat. Back in my car, I turned up the radio and let the white noise drown out everything but the pounding in my chest. They thought they had me boxed in, but I had saved the signal. Next, someone upstairs will press harder, because static is dangerous when it's recorded. Internal Affairs doesn't knock, it waits for you to fall. By morning, the whispers had started. My name, Alvarez, echoed in corridors it had no business occupying. Not praise, not curiosity. Just that low hum of suspicion, like a forgotten radio frequency still playing in the background. When I walked into the break room, conversations ended mid-sip. Coffee cups froze halfway to lips. One officer fumbled with the dispatch printer tray like it suddenly mattered. I grabbed black coffee, no sugar, and left. At my desk, the blinking light on the landline stared back like an accusation. 2 missed calls, no messages, but a slip of paper had been slid under my door. "Report to Internal Affairs, 4th floor, 9 a.m. Not even a signature, like shame leaves no fingerprints. The elevator ride felt longer than usual. Each floor passed with a ding, like a countdown to something permanent. At the IA reception, I handed over my badge. The woman at the desk didn't even flinch. "Room 3, she said. "They're waiting." Inside, it was just a man and a folder. "Detective Alvarez," he began, all smiles and shaved edges. "Let's make this easy." He opened the file, a stack of stills, surveillance from the warehouse, radio logs, a copy of the report with my name on it, already signed, except it wasn't my signature. "You recognize this?" he asked, sliding the page forward. "Yes, that's a forgery?" He raised his eyebrows. "That's a strong accusation." "No, it's a strong fact." He tapped the folder. "According to dispatch records, you were the ranking officer on site. You're also the only one whose radio line was active during the call." "I have the audio." That stopped him, a twitch in the corner of his jaw. He tried to mask it with a polite nod. "We'll need that." "You'll get it when I hand it to the U.S. attorney," I said, standing. "Anything else?" He didn't answer, but I heard it loud and clear. Back in the bullpen, a few familiar eyes dared to meet mine. My partner, Rachel, tilted her head. I shook mine. "You need to see this," she whispered, slipping her tablet across the desk. An internal memo, confidential, leaked. "Detective Alvarez named an early review of Case 21-409. Misconduct not ruled out." It was unsigned, of course, but the damage was already done. Whispers now had teeth. By late afternoon, my system access was partially revoked. Half my folders grayed out, my email forwarded. The only thing still untouched was my personal storage, where the radio audio of that night lived, unedited and time-stamped. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment the lieutenant said the words, her voice low and deliberate. "Sign this was your operation." And I remembered the eyes of the cuffed man in the warehouse, the way he looked straight past the agents and into mine, like he knew, like he saw the trap before I even recognized the bait. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about setting fire to the truth and blaming the smoke on me. I wasn't going to let them burn me down quietly. FOMO. What she doesn't know yet is that the file is already moving, and the ones who set her up are about to feel the heat from the very system they thought would protect them. What would you have done in her place? Sign and stay silent, or risk everything with a file they'll do anything to bury? Share your take. Your voice matters more than they think. They tried to erase her. You're the proof they failed. Someone's trying to bury this, and you with it. The file was gone. Not deleted, just moved. When I logged in that morning, the folder labeled District Case 21409 was still there, but the radio audio was missing. I stared at the empty directory for a long time, my pulse rising one slow, icy beat at a time. My hand hovered over the mouse, refusing to click away. My body knew what my mind didn't want to admit. Someone had accessed it. I reached for my backup drive. It was tucked in the second drawer of my desk, wedged between two outdated field reports and a packet of mints. Plugged in, opened, and... nothing? The backup was missing the time-stamped copy, too. Corrupted, the folder said. Like static in the lines. But this wasn't random noise. This was surgical. I closed everything and walked. Rachel caught up with me near the vending machines. She didn't speak at first, just handed me a plain manila envelope. No label, no markings. "What's this?" "Your voice. From dispatch," she said softly. "They're not all bought, you know. Some of us still hear the difference between silence and truth." Inside were printed logs, every radio transmission from that night, with the original metadata and a sticky note clipped to the top. "Filed under wrong case number. Deliberate. Check internal audit trail." I blinked. "Where did you get this?" She shook her head. "Don't ask. Just don't let it vanish again." That night, I drove to the old municipal lot where the city's archived servers used to be housed before the upgrades. It was mostly abandoned now, only one working terminal left for case migrations. I logged in under an old analyst's credentials I'd borrowed months ago for a cold case. That was the last favor the system ever gave me. An open door. I searched for case 21409, and the thread began to unravel. It wasn't just my folder. The entire sequence had been altered. The call logs were misfiled under a defunct narcotics bust, and the dispatch order had been redirected through an alias account traced back to, get this, an internal training supervisor who retired 3 years ago. Sloppy, or bold, or both. Then came the call. Blocked number. I hesitated, then answered. "You're digging where you shouldn't, detective." I didn't reply. "The lieutenant gave you a way out. You should have taken it." I kept quiet. The line clicked, just like that. But silence doesn't mean safety. Silence is the blanket they throw over the body before the real cleanup begins. Back at the precinct, I filed a sealed report, old school, printed, signed, and slipped into an untraceable internal affairs Dropbox still used by retired marshals. The kind of box you only use when the system has turned its eyes away. And I left something else, a flash drive labeled only with a post-it that read, "In case she disappears." Because the more I uncovered, the more I understood. This wasn't just about a corrupted file. It was about the fact that the wrong person heard the wrong thing on the radio and refused to forget it. The U.S. attorney never requests a file unless someone's cornered. 2 days after the radio logs vanished from my folder, I got a call I didn't expect. Not from Internal Affairs, not from my precinct, from the U.S. Attorney's Office. "This is Special Counsel Emery, Department of Justice. We're formally requesting access to audio files related to District Case 21409, the voice said. Precise, calm, too calm. I held the phone tighter. That's an open internal investigation. That's why we're asking. Your dispatch logs were flagged during a cross-agency scan. Someone embedded a signature mismatch in the dispatch routing headers. That's a federal felony. What do you need from me? Your unaltered copy, if it exists." It took me 5 seconds to decide. "I'll bring it myself." Rachel met me in the underground parking lot. I handed her a second flash drive, identical to the one I gave the marshals. "If I don't come back..." She cut me off. "I'll deliver it straight to media. You know I will." I nodded. "There's a buried memo in the report sequence. Look for a fake operations order from the lieutenant dated 2 days before the op." She blinked. "Pre-cleared? That's fabricated. She built the fall guy in advance. Me." Rachel's hands trembled slightly. She wasn't the only one shaken. The U.S. Attorney's Office was a marble-tiled beast. Clean lines, quiet halls, the kind of silence that makes every footstep feel like confession. I was led to a private briefing room where Emery and 2 analysts were already waiting. They plugged in the drive, played the radio file, and there it was, clear as daylight. "Dispatch, confirm lead on site." "Copy. Lead is Tactical Lieutenant Harmon. All units report to Harmon." Pause. "Detective Alvarez is responding only as backup. Do not engage without federal command." Emery looked up. "That's not what's in the official transcript." I leaned forward. "Because the official transcript is a lie." One of the analysts swiveled around. "This changes everything. The misrouting of the report chain, the planted sign-off from Alvarez, the falsified training supervisor login. It's a coordinated obstruction." "I know." Emery's face was unreadable. "We'll need your formal statement, effective immediately, and we'll be requesting the full dispatch archive." I gave a tight nod. "Start with January 14th, 11:04 p.m. That's when they started the setup." As I left the building, my phone buzzed. Blocked number. Again. I answered, silent. This time, a new voice. You think a federal inquiry will stop this? They'll throw one of us under, but not her, not the lieutenant. She's deeper than you know. Click. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because now the radio wasn't just a whisper I saved in the dark. It was a spotlight, and it was aimed at them, when the system can't deny the signal. Any more the next morning, our precinct felt colder. Not because of the weather, but because something had shifted. Doors were closed that were always open, conversations cut off when I passed by. Even Rachel kept her voice low. They're spooked, she said. Words out. DOJ pulled full dispatch logs. I nodded. Good. But inside, I knew this was the part where it usually goes quiet, before it gets worse. At 10:47 a.m., an internal affairs email landed in my inbox. No subject line, no greeting, just an encrypted link and a line of text. Per formal DOJ request, attached is the pre-op routing memo for Case 21-409. I opened it, and there it was, dated 2 days before the raid, signed electronically by me, or at least someone pretending to be me. My name, my badge, my supposed green light of an op I was never assigned. The document's metadata traced back to the lieutenant's administrative assistant, except the assistant was out on medical leave that week. I printed it, handed it to Rachel. Take it to the marshal drop. She paled. You're escalating. I looked her dead in the eye. They forged a federal sign-off. That's not a cover-up anymore. That's a felony chain reaction. That night, my precinct login was suspended. When I walked in the next morning, security met me at the door. Detective Alvarez, you're temporarily reassigned pending administrative review. I smiled. You're about 48 hours too late. The guard blinked. Ma'am? I stepped aside and gestured to the waiting SUV across the street. That's Special Counsel Emery's car. He asked me to accompany him to a joint oversight committee hearing. Maybe let Internal Affairs know I'll be a little late for their ambush. I walked across the street and didn't look back. Inside the SUV, Emery handed me a document. Testimony request. You're now a federal witness under sealed status. This means your badge isn't just safe, it's protected. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for weeks. And the lieutenant? I asked. He didn't smile, didn't blink. She's being deposed this afternoon. The DOJ verified her logins were used to create falsified dispatch orders and reroute radio archives. And her assistant gave a sworn affidavit confirming she was coerced into silence. I stared out the window. The city looked the same. But something in it had shifted. Slightly. Back home that night, I opened my personal laptop and pulled up a folder I hadn't touched in years. A copy of every case I ever worked, not just Case 21-409, but others. Ones that didn't sit right. Ones that had always felt like static in my gut. Because once you learn how they rewrite the signal, you start hearing the noise differently. Her silence wasn't loyalty, it was leverage. The lieutenant didn't fall right away. Power like hers doesn't crash, it cracks, in slow, deliberate fractures. And when it does, it takes pieces of the building with it. Her deposition was supposed to be sealed, off record. But someone leaked the first few lines to the press. Not the full testimony, just enough. It was understood the detective would assume responsibility. She was the most expendable asset in proximity. Expendable, not officer, not colleague, not even human. Asset. By noon, District Scapegoat was trending. The public didn't know the full story, but they understood betrayal. The city buzzed like an open wound. Inside the oversight hearing, the temperature was ice cold. Emery slid papers across to me, one by one, each one another thread in the unraveling. Forged radio logins, false dispatch reroutes. 2 other cases from the same district where suspect statements vanished. And then, finally, a sealed memo from an internal strategist outlining a protocol for containment when female officers raise federal flags. It wasn't just me, it was a pattern, a blueprint. Later that day, Rachel called. Her voice shook. "You need to see this?" I met her in the alley behind the old academy gym. She handed me a folder, actual paper, not a drive. Someone slid this under my windshield. Inside, printed emails between the lieutenant and a local developer, codenamed but traceable. Off-the-books asset redistribution was the term they used. In plain English, illegal seizures, bad warrants, property flips. I looked at Rachel. "They didn't just try to bury a file," I said. "They were laundering evidence through federal silence." Rachel nodded. "And you were the first one who refused to sign." By the end of that week, the lieutenant was placed on administrative leave. Her office was sealed, her badge turned in. But I didn't feel like celebrating, because the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was the space where danger regroups. They didn't issue apologies, no press conferences, no official acknowledgement that case 21-409 was ever tampered with. But late one evening, a courier dropped off a box at my doorstep. Inside, a thank you letter from the U.S. Attorney, a printed certificate, Internal Integrity Award, and a dispatch badge, unsigned, with a sticky note. "Sometimes systems rot from the top, but voices like yours keep the floor from caving in." I stared at the badge, then I shut the box and locked it in my safe. Because this wasn't over, it was just quiet. There was always a second file, just not meant for her eyes. The first hint came from an unexpected place, a rookie in dispatch with trembling hands and a guilty conscience. "Detective Alvarez," he called as I passed through the lobby. I turned, cautious. "Yes?" He glanced around and slipped a folded piece of printer paper into my hand. "Someone ran a duplicate transfer protocol on case 21-409 the night before the raid, but the destination folder wasn't yours." I opened the note, an internal routing number I didn't recognize, the initials BC scribbled at the bottom. "You didn't see me," he added, disappearing like a ghost into the elevator. I went straight to the archive lab, one of the last parts of the building still immune to administrative streamlining. Logged into the legacy storage system, using a forensic technician's clearance I borrowed long ago. Typed the routing number, and there it was, a hidden folder, password locked, time-stamped the night of the operation. Inside, not just radio audio, pre-op voice memos from the lieutenant, deleted dispatch queues, rerouted mid-transmission, a command override approving federal assets with 0 chain of command signatures. And then, like a nail through the heart, an early draft of the report blaming me, dated 3 days before the op, before any of it had even happened. They'd written the fall before the crime. I took the data straight to Emery. He scanned the files, one by one, growing visibly tenser. "This is premeditated, structured, clean enough to convince a grand jury, dirty enough to sink her." Then he paused, reading the header on a memo marked Contingency Protocol, Level C. "What is it?" I asked. Emery didn't answer at first. Then, "BC is Deputy Chief Barrett. The file was routed to his private oversight system." I felt my pulse spike. "You're saying the deputy chief knew?" Emery looked up. "I'm saying he authored the fallback." That night, I got home to find my front door slightly ajar. Nothing stolen, nothing broken, but one thing moved. The flash drive I kept hidden behind a fake light switch shifted just a little. A smudge on the casing that wasn't mine. A warning or a search. Either way, they wanted me to know the walls weren't just watching. They were moving. But now I had leverage, not just the file, the timeline, a perfect roadmap of intent. From the radio logs to the signatures to the pressure campaign to the fake login from a dead supervisor. And I wasn't alone. Rachel messaged me at 3:04 a.m. "There's another file, old case. They did this before. I found the pattern." I stared at the message, feeling everything sharpen into focus. They wanted silence. What they got was a blueprint for dismantling their illusion. Patterns don't lie. People do. I met Rachel at a diner we both used to laugh about back when the job hadn't cost us sleep. Now it felt like neutral ground. Linoleum floors, burnt coffee, and a waitress who didn't ask questions. She slid the folder across the table, her hands tied on the edges like she didn't fully trust it yet. "Take a look," she said. "I think we were chasing a single case, but this is something else." Inside were 3 reports, years apart, different precincts, different names. But the structure was identical. A female detective flagged irregularities in federal tasking. An anonymous tip placed her at the center of a dispatch failure. An operation gone wrong, with radio gaps and rerouted logs. Each one blamed, each one nearly fired, each one silenced before her case reached formal inquiry. The template was so precise it read like protocol. And the signature at the bottom of each approval order? B.C. Barrett, Deputy Chief of Oversight. I felt sick. "They've been doing this for years," I said slowly. Rachel nodded. Every time someone questioned a lieutenant or flagged radio inconsistencies tied to federal support units, they got looped into a file like yours, contained, buried. I leaned back. "And none of them ever spoke up?" She hesitated. 2 tried. One was reassigned to a rural task force with no jurisdiction. One, well, she resigned before her hearing, moved states, never filed a complaint. "Because they knew," I muttered. "The system doesn't just hide mistakes, it devours threats." I scanned the notes again. One file caught my eye. An officer named Detective Jamie Kerr. Same profile, same methods, except hers never made it to DOJ. The radio log was marked lost in transfer, but Rachel had something else. "Jamie kept one backup. Guess where she hid it?" I raised an eyebrow. "In an open access training module, inside a fake case file marked Scenario Testing, Dispatch Malfunction." The irony almost made me laugh. We pulled it that night, clean audio, crystal clear voices. And another lieutenant, different name, same threat. "You'll sign this was your operation, or I'll have you cleaning lockers in Arkansas." The pattern wasn't just proof, it was ammunition. And if they thought I was the only one stubborn enough to hold the line, they were about to learn the system they'd built had one fatal flaw. It left just enough static for someone to hear the truth. The system blinked first. A week passed without a knock on my door. Not silence, no, this was the opposite. Controlled chaos. Federal subpoenas flew like shrapnel. Internal Affairs tripped over its own memos trying to explain the inconsistencies. U.S. Marshals cross-referenced every dispatch reroute for the past 3 years. But most importantly, the deputy chief didn't show up to work, not once. Instead, a press release was issued, buried at 2:47 a.m., announcing Barrett's early retirement due to health considerations. Health? Please. That was code for, "We're cutting him loose before he names the rest." I didn't sleep that night, not because I was afraid, because I could feel something shifting. The pressure points had moved. For the first time, I wasn't the one dodging. They were. Rachel called just before sunrise. "You need to get dressed." "For what?" "There's a DOJ transport waiting at your curb. They want you present when they unseal the Barrett servers." I paused. Unseal? Physical, internal hard drives. Turns out he didn't trust cloud encryption, but he kept everything. Notes, voice memos, and guess what's labeled in red? I closed my eyes. I already knew. Case 21 Toyota 409. Inside the evidence lab, they cracked open Barrett's drive. The files were meticulous, cross-labeled, time-stamped, version-tracked. They didn't just build a fall narrative for me. They had backups of the backup lies. In one folder, a series of mock briefing documents with my name on them, each tailored to different outcomes. If I complied, promoted quietly. If I resisted, blamed for federal breach. If I leaked, discredited via planted misconduct reports. They had thought of everything. Except one thing, I kept the audio. Emery stood beside me, holding a document just handed down from the oversight panel. "They're voting today," he said, "on initiating formal charges, multiple lieutenants, a network of senior strategists. And Barrett, he's flipped." I stared at him. "What?" "He requested immunity in exchange for full disclosure. Meeting starts in an hour. You'll be there." Inside the chamber, they read the vote, 9-1 in favor of full investigation and prosecution. It wasn't justice yet, not entirely, but it was the system blinking first. Later that day, my precinct lifted the suspension. No press release, no public apology. Just a thin email. "Detective Alvarez is reinstated. All prior remarks regarding Case 21-409 have been expunged, effective immediately." I deleted it. Then I walked past the lieutenant's empty office and into mine, sat down, unlocked my terminal, opened the only folder that had ever mattered. District Case 21-409. Still there, still mine, still loud enough to shatter everything they tried to hide. The echo that never dies. I never meant to be the story, just the detective who showed up, did her job, and didn't flinch at the dark. But the day they tried to make me disappear inside a file, that was the day I became something else. I stood in front of the Academy's graduating class that morning, invited as a case integrity speaker, whatever that meant. I looked at their crisp uniforms, their polished shoes, the untested nerves in their shoulders. Most would never hear what I heard on that radio. Most would never read the phrase asset containment and wonder if it had their name on it. But some would, and they needed to know. "I want to tell you a story," I began, "about a file, about silence, about what happens when the system builds a cage and tries to convince you it's shelter." They listened, really listened. Even the instructors looked up from their clipboards. I didn't name names, didn't need to. The truth had already done its damage, quietly, relentlessly, like a dropped match in a locked room. Afterward, as the cadets filtered out, one lingered behind, a young woman with a notebook clutched tightly to her chest. "Detective Alvarez," she said, voice wavering, "I have a question." "Go ahead." "What do you do when your commanding officer tells you to lie?" I paused, saw her eyes, the fear, the recognition. I handed her a card. "You don't," I said. "And when they try to bury you for it, you leave them the file they forgot to erase." Back at my desk, I opened a new case, not assigned, just waiting. Rachel had found another pattern, one that didn't match my case but hummed with the same dispatch interference. A different district, same tactics. She called it Case 28502. I created the folder, labeled it, backed it up, because that's the thing about radio signals. You can suppress them, distort them, but you can't silence the echo, not if someone's still listening.